The Right Honourable, Kim Campbell is former Prime Minister of Canada. She's with me now. Ms. Campbell, it's such a pleasure to see you. Thank you for making the time.
It was fun, yeah.
How was it to be inside that room? Describe for those of us who didn't get to be on the inside what it was like.
Well, you know, it was delightful. The new Senate chamber is not as sort of august as the old traditional one with all of its paneling and stuff, but they've done a very good job of creating a place that the Senate can operate while the old building is being renovated. But it was, so it didn't have this sort of sense of feeling very old and traditional, but it felt very, I mean, the whole ceremony was very dignified, but it was like a party. And it was full of people, you know, who hadn't seen each other for a long time, and all the senators, you know, former senators, former ministers and members, and lieutenant governors, and all sorts of people. It was just really delightful, and people were just happy to be there. It was a very good feeling, and so it was like a big party. I said to the senators, you guys throw a great party.
Maybe something they've never heard before.
Yeah.
What do you think was the common purpose that brought everyone in that room together today?
I'm sorry, we've got some nice person wheeling over there, but this is Ottawa. People have to work. I think, first of all, the people recognize that it was a historic event. I mean, we have opening of Parliament every time we have a new Parliament, and it's always a very nice occasion. But with King Charles here, I mean, we haven't had the monarch here for, you know, since 1977. And of course, the fact that he's our new king, but also that he hasn't been well. I think people really valued the fact that he would come and do this. And I think from Prime Minister Carney's point of view, because it's really his speech that he gets to write, it was a wonderful opportunity just to demonstrate a little bit that, you know, Canada is not America, that Canada has a very distinct identity. And in fact, even with the monarchy, it works because we've Canadianized it, that the functions are performed by distinguished Canadians as governors general, lieutenant governors, and we alternate them every 5 years, and they come from all different walks of life in Canada. They reflect our diversity. So the monarchical institution has become a Canadian way of celebrating all the many peoples who make up Canada. And people do these jobs, and there's a lot of demand on the lieutenant governors in the provinces and on the Governor General. And they're the people who show that the ceremonial and kind of sparkly, patriotic side of our national identity can be led by somebody who then doesn't use it to press our political buttons, that is separate from power. And there's something very healthy about that we can, you know, honestly admire and celebrate who we are, but that we can still yell at our politicians and hold them to account in a very special way. So it's a remarkable institution because our head of state is not the head of government. The two things are separate. And so I think today, the fact that the king was there as a reminder of the origins of the institution, and the fact that he, you know, is our new king, and as I say, that, you know, people are concerned about himself, it just was very nice. It was a very friendly feeling. As I said, a lot of sort of un-American activities going on.
Well, I wanted to ask you about that because in the lead up to the King's delivery of the speech and his visit more largely, so much of what people were talking about was what would the message be to the United States. What do you think the message to Canadians today was?
Well, I think the message to Canadians is we have an old and respected identity. And we are an interesting country, and we have a French population. We have Indigenous people. We are a very interesting, diverse accumulation of communities and peoples that has made this very successful country. And the way we deal with it is very different from, for example, the way Americans do. And that we respect those differences, we celebrate them. The fact that everything was done in 2 languages, the fact that we had an Indigenous person who made a cultural presentation, the fact that our First Nations people were there in their magnificent headdresses and regalias and clothes. I mean, they're just absolutely beautiful. This is not something that you find, for example, in the United States or in many other countries. So it's an interesting reminder of what goes in to make the Canadian community, which sometimes means there's lots of conflict. It doesn't mean that we're all, you know, singing kumbaya all the time. And it's a challenge and makes it maybe more difficult to govern, but it makes it us. And I think today people were of a mood to celebrate it, and the throne speech recognized that. But what I thought was also interesting, and remember that, you know, King Charles has been here many times as Prince Charles and made lots of speeches that were his own. this was the government speech, and that's what the throne speech is. But it opened with a comment about the Prime Minister working with the President of the United States on issues relating to our economic relations and our security relations. And what that really said, too, is irrespective of all the other things that are happening, the government recognizes that it has a job to do. And the United States is a very important neighbor and partner, and the government is committed to working with the American government on the issues related to our economy and our security. Now, how successful those relations will be, we don't know. We don't know what's going to happen. We don't know what the Americans are going to do. But it is the intention, we're grown-ups. It's the intention of our government to continue to do what it always does, which is to interact responsibly and intelligently and in a friendly way with our neighbor. And that was the first thing that was kind of said of the speech, of the priority of the government. And, I think that was important. So it said, for all the other things, talking about the things that define us differently, at the end of the day, we're lovers, not fighters here. Canada's not looking for a fight. You rile us, we'll strike back. You disrespect us, the Canadians will act of their own accord to support their own products and to do those things. You can't stop them from doing that, and nor should you. But we're not a cantankerous country with respect to the rest of the world, unless we are treated disrespectfully.
I do want to ask you about the moment that we find ourselves in and the unique nature of this threat, I guess you can call it, both on sovereignty, as it were, before the election in particular, but also the nature of the economic punishment at the moment through tariffs and the threat of even more, even additional ones. You're one of the few people who have led this country. What has been going through your mind as you watch all of that evolve?
Well, what's been going through my mind is what we're seeing out of the United States is unprecedented. A president, I think, abusing presidential power, and in such a way that the courts can barely keep up with the challenges to it, and that Congress has, I think, very irresponsibly delegated to the president tariff power at a time when it isn't a national emergency. So, in previous times, the Congress was much more powerful, much more defensive of its prerogatives. We've seen that this bill the president has may not pass the Senate. So maybe we're getting some, vertebrae stiffening in some people. I mean, I don't know, but it's very concerning and very difficult to know how to act. And then the president came out and said he was going to have all these tariffs on Europe, and then he came out and said, well, no, I'm not. And all of that is extremely difficult, aside from the fact that it plays havoc with the markets, and you sort of wonder who is benefiting by those ups and downs. So, we're in uncharted territory here in many ways, and we have to be prepared to be nimble. But I think the important thing is that we have no control over what's happening in the United States, and what's happening there is unprecedented. And all we can hope is that cooler, saner heads will prevail.
Different political leaders during the campaign from all the different parties converged upon a point in response to what you just laid out that was, in essence, we can't control what's happening there, but we are in a moment where we can now take control of our own destiny.
Yeah.
Do you think that is the sort of what we are presented with right now?
Well, when President Kennedy said, geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, etc. Canadian governments have, for many decades, tried to diversify our trade away from the American market. And it's very difficult because the proximity and the size of the American market makes it just a magnet for activity. And that is why I think we've had these interprovincial trade barriers, because there were a lot of provinces where the North-South relationship economically was more important than the East-West one. So changing the Canadian trade patterns has been very difficult, and there have been people who wanted to do more to Europe or more to Britain or whatever, very difficult. But I think now we're seeing very significant reasons that we need to do that. And that's why the interprovincial trade barriers, which were mentioned in the throne speech, are such an important issue to address, because they've actually reinforced the North-South orientation of our trade. So we will never, I think, be able to orient our economic activity away from the United States. But we can try to shift the balance. And Europe is now, of course, a much different partner than it was even, say, in the 1950s when John Diefenbaker wanted to have more trade with Britain, because Europe has grown into an economic powerhouse. And for strategic reasons as well, Europe is very interested in better relations with Canada. We also have, relationships with Asia. So I think that it is important for us to do as much as we can to diversify our trade, recognizing that the dominance of the United States isn't really because people were lackadaisical or didn't care. It's because, trade goes where the markets are and where economic rationality is. So it's a hard thing to shift, but sometimes there are reasons. For example, the desire of Canadians not to travel to the United States, the desire of Canadians not to purchase American products. That's not a government policy. And so, to the extent that Canadians themselves can reboot the balance of our markets, we might find that we were able to make some changes that previous governments found very difficult to make.
I will leave it on that note. Ms. Campbell, such a pleasure. Thank you for taking some time for this.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
And it was fun.
Which is not a bad thing.
No.
The Right Honourable Kim Campbell.